Hi, good evening. I wonder if you can hear me. If there's anyone there who could drop me a comment to say they can hear me, that would be very useful. I'll wait until I get any confirmation. My name is Rod Fountain and I'm a photographer based in London. And today I'm going to give you a bit of an oversight as to my background in photography, how I got into photography, how I ended up working on Top Gear for 16, 17 years, and hopefully as many tips and tricks as I can to help people out there at all sort of levels of professionality, amateurs and professionals alike. I'm giving this talk for the first time from my home, which is really odd because normally we're in front of a crowd of 100 people and there's a bit of banter going on beforehand and lots of other talkers. So I have to say I apologize if there is any background noise. I've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old currently having their dinner just down there, so they're under strict instructions to stay out of the room. Good evening from West Wiltshire, Paul. So hopefully it will go pretty smoothly, but please excuse any hiccups. If there is any problems with the audio, please give me a shout in the comments and I'll have a look into it. Where are people from? We've got Paul from West Wiltshire. Have we got anyone further away than Wiltshire? Have we got anyone overseas? We'll have a look and see what comes down the line. In the meantime, I'll kick off tonight. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I'll start at the beginning. Everyone always asks me how I got into photography and how I ended up working on Top Gear. I graduated in 1996 from Nottingham University with a science degree and French, a good mix. And straight after graduating, I went straight into finance and banking, like you do, and into recruiting within finance and banking. I spent 6 months doing that and very quickly realized that I was selling my soul and I wasn't going to go down a career path that I wanted to choose. So I took as much money as I could at the time, every penny I could muster, including all the debt I could muster, and left the UK and went traveling for a while. I ended up doing something like 35 countries in a year. And that really gave me a good flavor for photography, and that I was absolutely horrific at photography. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew that it was certainly a career I wanted to go down. This is a first shot of me aged just 21. This is at Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Again, I was shooting there with an EOS Rebel, a Canon Rebel, with AGFA film that had been exposed to plus 50-degree heat for 10 years before I'd bought it. So it was a bit grainy to say at the least. But I traveled around the world, and during that time, I took lots of snappy snaps, loads of, just typical holiday snaps. When I came back after a year's travel, there was one particular shot that jumped out at me that made me wonder why that shot looked better to me. And it was this little chap here. And this was a shot I took in Chichicastenango market in Guatemala. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was using like a 300mm f400 or whatever zoom lens. And the background was blurred because it was such a high f number. The aperture was, was not very big. And I didn't know why I had that motion blur in the background. And the kid was sharp. Obviously, it had an image stabilizer on it. But I knew nothing about photography, and this grabbed me. And it made me want to learn more. I came back home after my year's travel, and I basically decided I wanted to go away again straight away, but with better equipment. So I went and bought an EOS 1 back then. It was an EOS 1N film camera. And again, I mustered as much credit as I could. Anything that anyone would give me, I put in the bank. And off I went to Australia for a year. When I got to Australia, I bought this trusty old steed, the Ford Falcon Ute, 6-speed manual gearbox. And I spent a whole year driving around Australia in this, living out of the back, trying to, excuse the pun, develop my passion for photography. I slept in the back, I fished, I camped, I slept in the outback. I just tried to spend as much time in the car, going down all the little nooks and crannies, the roads and all the little back avenues that I'd seen before going to Australia. But when I was on the big tour buses, you don't get to go down all the little routes you want to go to. So I had an absolutely wonderful time picking up weird hitchhikers and meeting crazy people, sleeping in the back of that van, doing basically landscape photography, wildlife photography, and becoming, you know, familiar with photography. I shot with Fuji Velvia, and during that time, it was a bit of a learning curve. Obviously, you've got the exposure latitude that's this wide. It's a very tricky slide to shoot properly, and I didn't really understand that at the time. But after a few months, I would drive about 3 months, and I'd develop, you know, something like 30 or 40 rolls of film. I'd get developed, and then have a look at it with my loupe in the car, and see what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. And at the end of that year, I had a half decent selection of images, and an even bigger passion for photography. Eventually, when I came home, I knew that I'd have to pay the debt off, and that was quite tragic. There was a lot of money I owed there, so I had to get work straight away and started chipping that debt away. But I wanted to work in photography. I had a big passion for cars. I've always loved cars. Here we are at Goodwood, and I saw the first photographer I met was this chap on the right called Richard Newton. He was a wonderful chap, and I just said to him, you know, can you show me a few techniques on how to do panning and tracking shots for cars? And he showed me a few things, and then said, you know, all right, bugger off you go. And I was still there 8 hours later, and he said to me, listen, if you're really passionate about photography, then how about you turn up tomorrow at Luton, and come and assist me? I'm shooting a car there, which I think at the time was a prototype VX220, and I did. Richard and I stayed together for 6 years. I was his assistant, and I was on and off working for him, driving cars for him professionally, for him to take pictures, learning all the time. And he had progressed from like Mamiya 6.7s, like medium format, to 35mm, and then eventually on to digital. Whereas I'd adopted digital more or less straight away with the Canon 10D. I was very lucky in that Richard worked for Top Gear magazine. And at the time, Top Gear Mag needed people to drive the cars for the photographers and the journalists to drive on the 3 or 4 car tests. So Richard said to Top Gear, why don't you take Rod? He's a good driver, good peddler. You know, take him out. He can drive the cars for the photographers and the journalists. So I spent the best part of the next 2 or 3 years working for Top Gear magazine, and then the TV, just driving the cars on the track like a pre-Stig. I was absolutely horrendous, and the health and safety back then was pretty scant, to say the least. So it was more of a, you know, who here can slide that Pagani Zonda around that corner? I'd be, yeah, I'll give that a go, and they'd let you. It's not like that anymore at the BBC. So I was driving these cars on every shoot, taking the cars to the shoot, being a production assistant on the shoot as well as a freelance basis. And I took my Canon with me, my Canon 10D, and very quickly, you know, Jeremy started to let me, you know, take pictures of the cars and himself and the presenters, and it became a sort of organic process. I was very lucky in that I was doing these trips throughout my 20s where I'd be driving on the track one day, then I'd be given the BMW X5 and told to drive down to Ouarzazate in Morocco, pick up a couple of journalists and follow the Paris-Dakar rally, and then come back to London. Which, you know, in your 20s, you're like, yeah, no problem at all. I'll take that BMW X5 with 0 off-road ability, and go down to the Sahara on my own with no maps or even a V5 document for the car. And I'll do that. So I did that, and it was an amazing life. Throughout my 20s, I was bowling around the world doing these odd jobs, goats in trees, and this one was great. Colin McRae was driving for Nissan then. You know, this is out in the Sahara, out in Morocco. And I was just dumbstruck at this lifestyle, this nomadic lifestyle, and the cars and the feel, and just everything about it was exciting and visceral, and it got me really hooked into car photography. So eventually my shots started percolating down. A lot of people were still shooting on film back then, so there was a lot of resentment in the editing houses, the editing back end of magazines and TV side. When people presented digital files, then they weren't interested. They didn't know how to edit raw files. But eventually a few of my shots started making it onto the pages of Top Gear magazine and a few other publications like Radio Times and Sunday Times, because I was the guy there with the camera. You don't have to be the best photographer in the world. You have to be the photographer there and be half decent. So here I am in my BMW X5, just taking a few shots. And eventually I started taking shots of the presenters. There's James over there on the top right on his first day at work, dressed to the nines. And these shots here, this was like the first shot I sold of Jeremy sitting on the Noble here. That made me more money than a month's worth of working for the BBC as a production assistant / driver. So I was hooked for life. The Sunday Times would pay me more money for a cover shot than you get in a month of driving, and it was a fantastic experience. Very quickly, my experience of photographing cars on tracks and people got noticed by a few event management companies, and they started putting me forward towards their clients. And one of the clients I was working for was Honda, and Honda gave me the job of doing the press shots. You used to get, in the old days, sound like a right codger here, an old codger, but you used to get photos in the glove box of a car when you bought a new car, and it would have all the fancy shots, and they were all individual to each car. You don't do that anymore. And I would go and do that for Honda on a few cars. I would take a mate with me, go off to Wales for the day, and then I was working for Honda with Jensen Button, flying all over Europe in this beautiful Sikorsky helicopter. I was during this time also working for the BBC as a Top Gear driver and as a photographer. And luckily, because the BBC has no money at all, there were commercial spin-offs that came from that. The DVD projects, which were always privately run and privately funded, paid a lot better. They were very extravagant. We got to travel all around Europe. We even did the States one year, which was absolutely outrageous. There were big budgets. They were beautiful tracks, like hiring a Ascari for 10 days, complete block booked, swimming pools, jacuzzis, underground bunkers with cars in. And back then, this is 2007, 8, 9, 10. As a photographer, I would work alongside the really talented camera guys of the day. There was a couple of guys in particular, Casper Lever, it was Ian May, Ben Joyner, really good cinematographers, great at their art. And we have a very similar eye. It doesn't matter if you're doing video or stills, you're always looking for similar sort of angles and similar sort of look. I learned a lot from them, and I like to think they learned a little bit from me sometimes. But we would basically go and take one of these cars every night, or two cars, drive off into the mountains after we'd been at the track all day shooting, and shoot the cars. No direction, no production around, just brand new supercars up in the hills. You could just, have fun, relax, wait till the light got nice and shoot them. And I learned a lot of my technique of shooting cars, in that way. On the DVDs, we did a lot of crazy stuff, blowing things up, a lot of traveling. It was wonderful to work alongside, this crew, even as a freelance status. The variation in every day, which is what I'll tell you about a bit later when I cover some of the specials that we've done. The variation that you get every day in a job was just tremendous. And from a photographer's point of view, it's such a challenge because you're going into this, with their skill set. A lot of photographers are good at landscape. They're good at, motor racing or bikes, or they're good at figure skating or bird photography because the settings. It's ingrained into your muscle memory. When it comes to this sort of work, where you're doing fast track action 1 minute, cars exploding the next, you're doing setup portrait shots the next minute, you're in a helicopter or hanging off a cliff face 5 minutes later. You never know what you're doing, and I found that really exciting. On one of this is a cracking day. We were out in the south of France, and we had to get back to Norfolk for a shoot the next day. And the director, Brian Klein, who's on the right-hand side here in the stripy shirt, he hired us a private jet to go from the south of France back to Norfolk. And we were flying in this jet back, and I said, let's get a group photo in the back. So imagine we're at 35,000 feet. All of us, we're not small. And I said, everyone's at the back of the plane, we get a picture. As I was taking the picture, the pilot flew the door open and said, for God's sake, can everyone come forward, we can't adjust the pitch. And the airplane was basically going up too far for the ailerons to cancel out. And he said that the weight at the back could have caused the plane to stall. So we all laughed about that, and I had another bottle of Barolo. Those were the good days. They were utterly fantastic. Working on Top Gear as well, it doesn't just mean you're doing the cars, as I said. As a photographer, I never like to be pigeonholed into what skill set you had. So I'm always looking around me on these shoots. All these pictures you'll see are taken directly on Top Gear jobs. It's the landscapes around you. It's the things happening to you. And I've always found having an eye for photography is as much as a blessing as a curse sometimes, because you can never put the camera down. There's always something to see. There's always something to photograph. When the others have, put everything down, put the camera gear down, they've given their rushes to the director and the producers, and they're moving on, I've got one eye looking out the window at a sunset or something else. So it's tough work, but it's immensely rewarding. Here you can see a few of the situations we get into. You know, we went to Gibraltar. We were lucky enough to go to Ukraine just before that got reacquired by the Russians. We've been on boats in the Med. We've been through the Nile, Argentina, which I'll touch on later. It's been a really fabulous photographic experience for me. And that's what I want to try and give you guys a flavor of what it's like a day in the life on these shoots, or even a week in the life. You certainly don't expect to get up one morning and be hanging off a cliff face, seeing a flag that big, or having this Chinook helicopter going over the top of you with Ken Block was driving the Ford Mustang through London. And I'll never forget the caravan airship down the bottom there. If there's ever been a time where I thought we were going to be -1 presenter at the end of the day, it was that. That was absolutely terrifying. Working with light as a photographer, you never get a chance on behind the scenes TV and film to manipulate the light. You do not have any equipment on you other than what you have in your pocket and on your person at the beginning of the day. You do not have a chance to go back to a bag. You don't have a chance to recharge, to download. Your day often starts at 6 a.m. and it finishes at midnight. You need to learn to use the light that's there with you. So you can see here, you know, we've got lots of different techniques going on here. A bit of starlight here with the alpha in the middle, which was filled in by a torch, believe it or not, a panel light that they use to pack away the van. You know, up here in the top left with the Zenvo, that was some steel wool, in a cage that was lit and spun around with a couple of lights either side. Shooting into the light, I'll talk about that later as well. Basically, disregard every single rule of photography. Be as creative and experimental as you can. I also do commercial work, so I do advertising and editorial work for car manufacturers and anyone else. And this is, you know, you've got to have a good stomach if you're going to do this work. You can see here, we're winding up a road here in the south of France. We did a shoot in France and in Iceland back to back for Mazda. And you can see here I'm shooting this Mazda MX-5 going up the road. I'm looking to position the car in a certain way to get the light in just the way I want it. I'm using a circular polarizer on there so I can knock the reflection out of the driver to either see the driver or not see the driver, and to saturate those colors nicely, and to lower my shutter speed as much as possible on a really bright day. I want to shoot down here about 1/10 of a second, 15th of a second max to get that nice sort of swishy look. You're always looking for shadows here, the boot creeping in. You tape up the back of the lights of the car in front, so if they do touch the brakes, the red lights don't reflect and ruin the shot for you. There's a lot of things to think about. And you're looking for, you know, these are generic sort of, they're relatively straightforward to get. If you've got a strong stomach and a proper image stabilized lens, these are not superbly difficult to get. I could train anyone to get these kind of shots in, you know, I think a day easily, and you could be producing stuff like this. You can see here with this shot, it's pretty much ruined in that you can see cars in the background. We could get rid of them easily today with software. And just in the front of the car here, in the bumper, you can just see me hanging out the back. You could retouch it, but it's just an example of things that you're always trying to think of whilst you're bouncing down the road backwards, trying to hold your stomach together with the camera bashing against your eyes. So it's good fun. Here we are looking at that classic shot coming through the road there in the south of France. Twin car tracking is actually very difficult. I find that very, because obviously they're both moving relative to each other as well as you. So it's tricky to get that right. Here is a classic shot where, you know, I've photoshopped the foreground. In the foreground here on the right, it's a bit of a mess, but I give the client, you know, about 4 or 5 different images of variations of the same pan to give them that same perspective of the background. And in this shot, the background has been stolen from a photo. The sky is from a different photo, which is a nightmare with reflections, and so is the foreground. And you can see here in a final shot, again, this is a different background. The mountain range wasn't there in this shot, and the foreground on the right as well has been altered as well. So when you're taking the shots, you're always looking for many variations, thinking how they're going to be used, how the client might want to use them, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. I'm also looking at doing, panoramics, giving them value added, even little video clips for them to use. So even though a client may give you a brief, a specific brief, as a photographer, it's hard not to just see the shot and go for something that really excites you. And I often like doing the big vistas with the cars in there. Again, on this shot, you can see me holding, or somebody, no, it might be me even. No, it's not me, obviously. The camera's on a tripod, but there's a reflector there in the foreground. We need to map that out, little things like that. This is in Iceland. And then I think never miss an opportunity for a photo was one thing I've always tried to tell people. This was a drizzly day in the south of France. No, in Italy. We were up in Italy. It was a drizzly, wet evening. It was getting dark. It was raining, just coming on. And as we were walking back to the cars to go home, I just saw that rock face. I knew it would look good because it had some sort of mica rock in it that reflected light. It looked awesome when the light caught it. So I shoved the flash on the floor behind the car and put another 2 flashes up in the air, held up high. I got one of the camera guys to hold 1 flash, just speed lights, 580 EX, 200 quid speed lights. They're absolutely bashed to pieces, but they still work. And that's just a very quick shot. And I just really like the cleanness of it. Made it look good. I also do corporate events. If you can do corporate events, you can do anything with people. I really enjoy corporate events. They pay really well, the food's brilliant, and you don't have to work very hard. But apart from that, the challenge of the photography is always there. You're always looking to establish a relationship with the people you're photographing. So if you do happen to accidentally catch their eye or make a noise when you shouldn't do or get in the way, it's not too much of a problem. In here, it really teaches you really cut your teeth on when to push the shutter and when not to push the shutter. These corporate events are often extremely quiet, and there's a lot of very big egos involved. A lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of influence. So you've got to be very skilled on when you do it. It makes no difference whether you're photographing people on TV and film or corporate events. It's exactly the same skill set. But with these guys, the egos were even bigger on a couple of them. And learning when to put the camera in their face and when not to is a really good skill. And with Jeremy, it was always a case of 50-50. You never really knew. He could be happy 1 minute and bark at you the next and scream at you the next and, offer you a cigarette and a pat on the back the next minute. I don't smoke though. But this was great. It really, really taught me, how to interact with big egos on these sets. And what I loved, excuse the shot on the right, what I loved was going to work every day. It was completely different. One day I'd bump into Prince Harry on set, and we even did the fastest economy supercar back in the day. Prince Harry drove the R8 on that. I don't think anyone knows that. He was driving the R8. I was driving the Aston Martin DBS on the time, and every time you go to a job, there's John Lacey down there getting his lasagna takeaway from the Top Gear cafe. It's just completely random. The job took you everywhere. Also, like I said earlier, when you go in the morning, you've got everything on you. You've got to make sure that you're ready to do, a portrait shoot. If you happen to be called in to do a portrait shoot, you'll be given 30 seconds, and that's it. You've got to get in there. No setting up. You just tell people to grab lights, to do things, and try and get on with it. So the pressure on you is enormous, especially when James likes to do this. I have about, at last count, about 800 separate images of James giving me the Dean Martin, James Martin, giving me the V. It's an amazing collection, but it ruins so many shots and you can't really Photoshop it. I want to talk about how the images are going to be used. It doesn't really matter what camera you use or what you're shooting. You've always got to have one eye to how your pictures are going to be used in future. They're not just used today for the client. Eventually, they may want to use these for editorial purposes, online purposes. They may want to chop them up into composite images. So with a few of these images here, it's just an example of leaving room, like on the Porsche, the left-hand side, you're leading the eye into the picture to the Porsche there, but you're leaving space for copy. On the Willow Springs shot up here with the Corvette and the Plymouth, you're leaving that gutter space in the middle, so the page can fold. And the same with Jeremy here and the Alpha. You're leaving space for copy, so you're always trying to think how the images are going to be used. This is a typical kind of shoot on Top Gear or any TV show. It doesn't matter if it's cars or otherwise. You see that shot and you think, oh, that's a nice shot. You just stuck your camera in there. Everything was set up for you and you took it. Well, this was the situation, and you are about as important, well, actually, you're less important than the coffee boy as a photographer. You are expected to be not seen and not heard. So getting in here is quite difficult. You think you just, go in there between the sound guy and the camera guy there and take a shot. You can't. The sound guy there has got a mic there. On the 5D2, 3, 4, the shutter was just too loud. It would be too intrusive. The only time you get to take a shot would be before they say action and after they say cut, which is often when, you know, you wouldn't get the best. Today with the R5, which, you know, I got about a year ago, and the EOS R, all those troubles have dissolved. I can't believe how many problems that the Canon EOS R range has solved for me as a photographer behind the scenes. It's immense. On this one here, you think you'd creep round the right there of the dolly. You see the dolly of the Russian arm on top of the Nissan there. If you go around to the right, the sun is also on your right. So if you crept round there, your shadow would go straight across the car. You'd get fired. If you walked across the gravel and the mic picked up, you'd get fired. If you walked between the cameraman and the sound guy and pushed the shutter down, you'd get fired. If I accidentally got the 1DX out and hit the button, I'd be fired and never work again, because that camera was like a Gatling gun, even on silent mode. So there's always these things to consider. On this shoot, we also had a drone in the air as well. So there are multiple angles here, and you as a photographer are expected to get into a melee like this, where there are people working. It's not a static set either. As you know, on Top Gear, people are walking around. Jeremy, James, and Richard may change their mind and suddenly lurch out of camera shot, and the camera guys have to follow them, and so do the sound guys. So you, as a photographer, you can't have one eye to the camera and the other eye closed. You've got to have both eyes open and really try and understand how the scene is going to develop and how you can stay out of the way, which for me is not very easy. I'm 6'3" and, you know, 200 plus pounds a lot. And it is a tricky task. The smaller you are, the easier it gets. Down on the track here, you're also got to be very aware on the bottom right here with the BMW coming through shot. You've got to be very aware of long camera angles. You think you've got every angle covered and you're out the way, and sure enough, you'll be slap bang in the middle of someone's shot. This is out in Africa. We did the Source of the Nile. This is out in Uganda, one of the specials. And the thing about here I want to talk about is dynamic range and the difference between shooting with stills cameras and video cameras, especially 5 years ago. They would often achieve, the Sony sensors back then would often be able to pull 14 stops of dynamic range out of more or less every shot, whereas on the 5D3, you know, 2 and 3 back then, this is longer than that, actually, 10 years ago, you would struggle to get 7 to 10, you know, in real life. So you're always shooting into the sun. As a photographer, again, it doesn't matter. You just try and learn to experiment with these things. And, you know, shooting into the sun here with the aerial atom up in Morocco, shooting down here on the bottom left with the presenters on a track, you're using that reflected light off the runway, off the track there, to kick some light into them and overexposing slightly. Shooting into the sun with the Mercedes here, again, using the auto bracket function always helps, and using the HDR function, as long as you've got the raw files, also helps. And these were handheld, you know, the top right was handheld, and that's as low as probably a 1/10 of a second, going up to, you know, 100th of a second, 200th of a second on a bracket, 3-stop bracket. The cameras that you're shooting around, as I said, are always shooting into the sun and looking for edgy, hard light, which is not really what you're looking for as a photographer. You're always looking for that soft light that sort of really brings out the best in your subject. But I've learned to embrace this over the years and learned to throw all the rules out the window. And you see on the top left here, this is where they filmed from. This is the shot that they wanted. And I moved a little bit around on the top right. You can see the bike jumping, and that's where I would rather have gone to get the shot, to get the light on the subject. Again, another example of being prepared here. James, bottom left. I had literally 30 seconds to get a quick shot for James here for the cover of the Radio Times. I had 2 pocket flashlights again, one held just top left and one put on the floor just by his feet to fill in on the Ferrari front there. And that was a very quick shot to get. Shooting into the sun, again, I love it. I do it more now than I've ever done before. And I really love lens flare. I think a lot of people try their best to get rid of it. If you're going to get it, you might as well just embrace it and work with it, especially if it's editorial content and it's not critical. I really love the flare that the Canon 70-200 Mark I 2.8 IS lens gave. That top right, that beautiful halo that you only get on the Mark I version. This is the system I was telling you about, and I was saying you get up in the morning at 6 a.m. The belt I have on there is a Spider Pro belt, a Think Tank with a Spider Pro clip. Everything on there was what I had at the beginning of the day. I'd have until I went to bed. So I'd have a 16-35 2.8. I'd have a 70-200 2.8. I'd have a 300 f4, which I absolutely loved, and a 24-70 2.8. I'd also have 2 pocket flashlights, 2 senders for the flashlights. I'd have 2 wireless mics in case I needed to do a quick interview as well. Sometimes you find yourself with the presenters in the middle of nowhere and they want to do a piece to camera, and it's ideal for you to just quickly mic them up and do, you know, a quick piece. Circular polarizers, batteries, loads of memory cards. Also remember clothing as well. Sometimes it can range from like -10 in the morning to +25 in the afternoon. So, and it can be raining sideways and you're in jeans and a t-shirt, you're in trouble. So you have to be carrying just about everything with you that you might need for the whole day. This was my kit probably 8 years ago, and now it's an R5 gripped. It's an EOS R gripped, which I love that camera as well for just stills, static wise. I've got all the RF lenses now from the 15-35 up to the 70-200, and now I've also got a 500 f4, which is a Mark 1 with the EF adapter, which is brilliant. But I've still got variations of a lot of this. I've now got a big ultra wide screen and 4K monitors, which are a lot more easy to work with. I'd love to talk to you a bit about the specials. If anyone's got any questions about the specials or questions about technical things or anything they want to know, just drop me a line in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. The two specials I want to talk to you about and the process of how these specials come about and how you as a stills photographer are expected to work on these and deliver is what I'll cover next. This is a shot in Desperation Sound down in Chile, Argentina, Patagonia. And this is a shot in Uganda on the border in Africa on the special. 2 of the best specials that I really loved working on. These specials don't just come together overnight, as I know you know. You've got a team of 150 people working in the background. You've got probably about 20 people who are core to that project back at the BBC who are working 24/7. They go out, they do recce's beforehand for months on end. They talk with all the people on the ground. They get fixers, police, army, whoever's involved. But what happens on the day when you're there is never controlled. It can always be chaotic, and that's what you film. But a lot of the time, Top Gear got accusations that things were set up and stuff. To a certain degree, they were planned, but they were never really set up. They were always organic, the way they unfolded, and that was what the humour was about. But as a stills guy, you come into this team. There are probably 15 cars in front of you on one of these specials. The medical car, the fixers, the camera crews, the support crews for the talent, the Winnebagos, the coffee boy car, the trucks, and then the photographer's car, 7 countries back. So you have to try and find a way to negotiate your way into various other cars over the course of 3 weeks to get to the front of the line to get your shots. You don't just do stills either. This was a case of me getting up in the morning in Bariloche in Argentina to go down for breakfast. I thought there might be a good sunrise, so I stuck the camera on the window with a suction cup and just put it on, a shot every 5 seconds and went to breakfast. So I was always looking to add value to the production. And this is the glamorous situation. This is where you will live as a photographer. I lived in this Land Cruiser in this seat here for 3 weeks. And this was all my gear. Again, I'm a big guy, squeezed in there. You've got your camera gear around you. You've got, my case down the bottom there with laptop. You've got batteries to keep things going. You're plugged in, to the car. You've got 2 alternators in the car and many batteries to keep things flowing. And that's where you're going to be. When you start shooting, you get set up shots to begin with. So you go out there with your gear. It lulls you into a full sense of security on these shoots. The first few days, you think, oh, this is lovely. We're at a hotel. There's hot water. There's food. I can go down and photograph the cars by the lake. This is going to be really easy. And then you get in the car and you don't see any of the production or the talent for 3 days because they're miles ahead of you. I spent my entire life on these shoots, shooting backwards, listening on the radio to hear when the presenters are going to come by. And you're shooting as 1DX here, 70-200. I'm shooting at a 10th to a 30th to a 50th of a second, handheld out the window on washboard roads, trying to get pictures of Richard, James and Jeremy approaching from behind if we had gone ahead of them. It's really challenging. I mean, you're getting through, a few thousand shots a day just to get a few keepers in these situations. But I had the biggest selection of through the window images that you could ever imagine. Just because you're stuck in the car, again, isn't really an excuse to not come back with some pictures. So I'm always on the lookout for wildlife and just pretty landscapes. And again, I just can't put the camera down. These pictures here were all taken across Central Africa when we went there. Rwanda, Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania. And again, all taken with a 7200 or a 300 just out of the window of the car when we were driving through. This shot was taken in Chile, and at the time I had a 17-40 f4 on, and I was looking backwards out of a window with it bouncing off my head, going along a washboard road, photographing James coming up close to me in the car. And then I looked backwards and saw the bridge and thought there might be a good view. So I just ratcheted up the time value from a 30th or 50th up to whatever it went to, 500 to the second, and swung it round and took a shot. It was one of my favorite shots of the trip in terms of landscape shots. But yeah, you don't get the time to sit down there and put a nice ND grad on, get your polarizer on, get your tripod out, stick it at f11, and bracket and do focus stacking. You've really got to just get the job done straight away. Again, this shot, there's a few shots here taken out of the window. This was taken next to our hostel in Chile, just over the border. And this was a composite of about 15 images. It was a very wide panoramic, which I then cropped to 5x4 in the middle. But again, I love these sort of images. I love always keeping an eye out and looking for stuff to snipe. If you were really lucky as a photographer, you could negotiate with Ben here to get a seat between him and his camera. So you can see the discos, we use the discos all the time because they've got the flat back, which is really helpful for getting in and out. Ben's not a small guy, his camera's not small, but sometimes I would get a chance to squeeze in there and shoot on a long lens, a 70-200 or a 300 or even a 400 between Ben's armpit and the camera towards the talent in the car. Really difficult, makes you really sick. Lots of carbon monoxide coming out there. What's one of my favorite adventures with the Top Gear guys, James asks. That would be a DVD we did in the United States many years ago, which was outrageous. I might get a touch on that later. Getting shots of all the three cars together, that's a real challenge because you've got to get right to the front of the queue. Here I managed to jump in with the drone guys, and the drone guys, they have to take their van 10 miles ahead of the cars that are driving, the production cars. The cars don't stop for pieces to camera. The cars are rigged with cameras, 4 or 5 cameras in them, and they shoot for 2 hours straight. And they only stop for batteries, emergencies, and general checkups. So we jumped ahead. I got in the drone car, drone went up, and whilst the drone was up, I was standing next to the drone guy there to get a shot. Unfortunately, the drone guy might not have space for you when they head off again. So you might end up having to wait a day for another car to come to get you. Meanwhile, you miss all the action ahead of you. But that's okay, because there's still lots of pretty landscapes to take like this. Again, always keeping my eye out. I was always really happy taking the landscapes. We did a lot of setup things in that you do a lot of driving, but about 2 or 3 times a day, you'd have big set pieces where you'd have to stop. A morning, afternoon, and evening setup. And this was one of them. We were lucky enough to go to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids ranch, hideout ranch in Argentina. Amazing to go there, really enjoyed it. And this is just one of the perks of the job again. Sometimes you end up going to so many places, you have to retrospectively look on the map, on the GPS coordinates from your phone, on the pictures to understand where you've been and what you've seen. There's just so much being thrown at you every day. But these were great. I really enjoy photographing these setups. This was the guys crossing a bridge in Argentina. It's not a setup. This bridge had not been used by traffic for a long time. It wasn't structurally perfect. There were a lot of things that could have gone wrong. We had divers in the water on the edge there. Obviously, the water's flowing very hard as well. We had specialists behind us, who I'll show you in a minute, who would have leapt to their protection if they had fallen in, if it had broken, with athletic poise and ability. But there's a lot going on here which you can't see behind camera, with people everywhere milling around. The danger is real, and for that, it's always edgy. It's always fun to see what happens. And there we go. This was part of our posse. These guys were there to help out, but we did also have a boat in the water on the other side with a diver and various other things downstream in case they get washed down. And again, I love this. Look at this vista. We stopped here after driving for an afternoon, and everybody on the crew was just taking lunch, sitting there eating a ham sandwich. And I'm just looking around as a stills guy. Just because you're there to photograph talent and cars doesn't mean you can't do landscape photography or wildlife photography or macro photography whilst you're there. It does mean you'll never sleep ever again because you spend your life backing up, and I'll talk to you about that later. Again, this was taken out of a car window, doing about 50 miles an hour, just lovely shots, beautiful scenery. Nothing amazing about them, they're just snappy snaps, really. But they're just really easy to get, and I couldn't find a reason to not continue shooting all the time. This is often the case when you're traveling in Africa or South America or war-torn countries. You get a lot of roads that are either washed out or fully destroyed, and you have to find another route. And here in, I think we're in Chile here, we had a lot of landslides. We have to wait for a while to get a JCB in, or an excavator would clear the road for us. But it was, it's exciting. This is the height of luxury, okay? This does not happen often. This is a cabana out in Chile or Argentina, I forget. And it was a bit of a lulling us again into a full sense of security. It was one of the first days we were there. Lovely cabanas out in the woods. You think, oh, this is a lovely, I'm having a lovely time here. Here we are doing one of the setup scenes. I told you do the scenes in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And this one we were doing a Groucho barbecue. It's a bit gruesome. I'm sorry if there are any vegetarians out there, but it is what it is. In Argentina, they eat a lot of meat and they don't waste anything. But we were doing a scene here. Again, nobody's filming this. The guys are just keeping warm by the fire. But again, as a photographer, you've always got one eye. You're looking over there. What are they doing? You see the light on their face. I've got to get this shot. You're grabbing your camera. You're working again. And this was our barbecue. I know it doesn't look that appetizing, actually, in retrospect. It's a little bit macabre, but it did taste quite nice. From a photography point of view, it's tricky. I mean, in this shot, you've got headlights, you've got halogens, you've got the sodium vapor light over there, you've got the firelight over there, you've got an exposure latitude that you need of about 15 stops or more to get all of this in shot. Bracketing's not an option. You know, you just have to do the best with what you've got there, and hope that the raw file's got enough detail that you can pull that out later and make it usable with not too much noise. This is just to highlight again, when you're out shooting, you can go from using, here on the 300 f4 out in the desert, you're doing long end stuff, trying to get establishing shots of the cars in the environment. As a stills photographer, you're always trying to give the narrative in stills form. So I'm always imagining that the rushes get lost, which did happen on a job once. Imagine all the video rushes go. I want to be able to show everybody what happened on almost an hour-by-hour basis through the medium of stills, So I'm always shooting everything. And here you can see we've got the drone up in the air. This was an octocopter back then. There was no DJI, easy Inspire up and launch stuff. This one got smashed to pieces, actually. We're not quite sure. Something went wrong with the GPS signal. We think at the time he may have flown over some sort of magnetic rock that mucked up with the GPS, but these things need to be dealt with. So that was £20,000 straight into the dirt. And yet we've got a scene tomorrow where we need the drone. And yet you're in the middle of the desert in Chile or Argentina. So phone calls need to be made and things need to happen. It's amazing watching that happen. It really is breathtaking. So here you're going from the long end stuff. A cameraman ran up to get some panning shots of the cars coming through. Remember, when they're panning, they're going from far right to far left, okay? You as a photographer, well, where are you going to go? They're at about 3 foot high. You can't go above them because the cameraman's standing there in your way. You can't go beneath them because he's got massive tripod legs there. What you need to do as a photographer is kind of work your way with him slightly to the right or left of the lens, panning through, trying not to get the cameraman or his equipment in shot whilst not ruining any potential sound for the cameraman. Again, it is tricky, and you're going straight from long end stuff to very up here with the 70 to 200 or the 24 to 70, panning through. You're also looking at doing panoramas. Again, these are not stuff that they might necessarily ask for. The clients are not asking for these big, establishing panoramas. But I mean, when you're in the desert and you see that shot in your mind, you've got it. And the top one here is a stitch of about 12 images. It makes more work for you, but the end result is, can't be argued with. This shot was an impromptu shot. This isn't Jeremy posing for a shot. The 3 cars pulled up like that, not even for a piece to camera, it just happened to be like that. And I saw Jeremy about to step out of the car and just walked over and just got this shot. It's one of my favorites of the shoot with the 3 cars. You can see the number plates missing there for reasons you might be aware of. Again, James ruining a lovely shot there, but I really like it. It's a shame, you know, the BBC couldn't use shots like this, but it's something I have with me for the rest of my life, along with the memories, and it's a good shot. I see Richard's also. I just noticed Richard doing it after 10 years. Again, behind me, these guys are walking up behind me, and I'm like torn. I really want to do landscape and wildlife, and I wanted to shoot behind the scenes, and you just wish you had 5 cameras on you at the time, and you could just be everywhere at once. Talking about everywhere at once, this is a classic situation when you have 4 things going on. So on here, we'd have 3 different cars going in 3 different directions on the same day, and 1 stills photographer and 4 camera crews. So they're covered on the video side of things, but on the still side, you have to commit very early in the day on the shoot as to who you're going to follow. And if something happens, like Richard breaking a tie rod, or James crashes, or Jeremy runs out of fuel, and you've got to get that a still shot of that to make the narrative work, it's really difficult to try and keep one ear on the radio to hear what they're reporting to each other, because the presenters have their own private radio back and forth, which we often tune into so we can hear them talking. And then we have another radio with production on. So you're always listening for production, you're listening for talent, and you're also listening for what the tonal inclination of the conversation actually means, what they're inferring and implying, and what might happen in the future. And as a photographer, you're trying to jump ahead to make sure that you're at a certain place at a certain time to witness something. Again, boring shot this, I know, but it's a necessity. I'm looking for a gutter shot here with space in the middle for an editorial so they can write over it. Again, I just love looking around me. This is in a car park again. The road's on the far right there. We've just come around the bend. We're waiting for the talent cars to overtake. It looks like some lovely bonsai tree and some beautiful clouds up in the sky. You never stop working. And here again, I'm in the blue puffer jacket here, walking around photographing the cars. But I also knew that this would make a good time lapse. So again, this is 1 shot every 5 seconds. 1DX up on a magic arm on a ladder, just overlooking where they were modifying the cars in Argentina, and then off the cars go with their modifications. Meanwhile, this is out in Africa.
Speed and power. Speed and power doesn't work. It was doing quite well though.
I hope you could hear that, but basically I'm shooting with a 5D Mark II there, and we're up in Rwanda. We're going up to a gorilla sanctuary in these cars, and Jeremy's going through the mud there. And I was shooting with a 5D Mark II, panning through, shooting video, but also managed to shoot a still halfway through there. The R5 now, it's incredible shooting 4K or shooting 8K on small clips without C-Log. Means you can pull 35 meg still grab frames. I mean, that just blows my mind considering where we were just a few years ago. So now shooting video becomes a real good tool for the photographer. But back then, I'm shooting a combination of video and stills on the 5D Mark II and 3. And here we can see that I'm always thinking about shutter speed. When the car bashed into the mud here and got stuck, I want to show motion on the wheels. So you're lowering the shutter speed there to about 1/10 of a second to try and get that wheel spin to make it look like it's having something happening. And here you can see you've got the Ugandan military police came out of nowhere in the middle of this jungle and literally manhandled these cars up the hill through the mud for us, which was just amazing. We would have been stuck there. And here they are pushing the Ford Scorpion out of the mud as well. This is a typical kind of place that you get to stay when you're on Top Gear. Doesn't that look amazing? This is at the Gorilla Sanctuary. You can see a mountain in the distance there, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we're in Rwanda. You think, wow, look, we got to our destination early. The sun's up still. We can relax and go and look at gorillas. No, you can't. So the equipment gets dumped in the hotel room, and off you go. You're back out for another 8 hours. Often at night as well, after you finish shooting and the light goes down, all the panel lights go up and the engineers are modifying all the cars. Here you can even see Jeremy getting involved, modifying his own car. And down here we've got Peter modifying the Subaru with angle grinders. Again, all the equipment they've got with them, the generators and the batteries and the lights. It's like a small village that goes with Top Gear everywhere you go on these productions. And in the morning you can see, yeah, very funny, Richard's got a toilet on his bonnet, etc., etc. It is funny to the crew. I know a lot of people, like or dislike Top Gear, but what you can't say is that it's not exciting. And working on it was always an incredible challenge. But I loved all these weird things happening. Here we're in a village. We just got off that boat there, and Richard got stuck in the sand. We wanted to get him out, and we offered to pay, or production offered to pay some of the locals to help push us out. Unfortunately, about 400 of them came and started pushing him out, and then they all requested money afterwards, and it got very, very spicy. It was getting quite tense, and we had to move out of there pretty quick. We did have security with us. We had an ex-army, ex-SAS guy with us who kept his cool and guided us to our vehicles, and just with his demeanor managed to hold back everybody and get us out of there. That's happened a few times. Most of the time it's okay though. People see these things when they're doing it, like the bridge earlier. You see them crossing here on this raft. Yes, okay, the raft was half produced for them. It was wrecked beforehand. The equipment was there. They didn't just happen across it. But had it been tested with a full weight car? No. Did you know the conditions of the river? No. Were there crocodiles in there? Yes. Was it dangerous? Yes. Could it have flipped over at any time? It's really fun to shoot these. You never know really what's going to happen. They did have little self-inflating life jackets under their shirts in case anything went wrong there. And again, turn the camera around as a photographer. You're always looking at the locals, seeing the look on their face. What on earth are they doing? This is a lovely shot. I just love this because it's one of the very few I have of Andy Willman, exec producer, and Jeremy just relaxing with a bottle of Nile ale at the end of a shoot in Uganda here. In Uganda, it was amazing. Here we are, it's in Entebbe. It's breathtaking, the variation you get over such short distances. This taxi rank here in the city centre, and just half an hour away, you've got a tributary here of the Nile. The humanity juxtapositioned against nature in Africa is just amazing. It's breathtaking how you can go from one to another. And again, as a stills photographer, your mind boggles. You don't know where to point your camera at. There's just so much going on. There are a few downsides. We had an outbreak of Ebola whilst we were there, which was not great. And this is a good way of just showing you the ways you get to work. I've got to work on hot air balloons, on tanks, on rafts, on the top of vehicles, you name it. Top Gear has got its staff to work in some of the most bizarre ways. And here's Andrew Charley on the left with his octocopter in the boat here, going to an island on the Nile. And here up here is Ian May, one of the cameramen, caked in 6 inches of dust, shooting up there on top of the Toyota. This is where you stay. You don't get nice salubrious surroundings all the time. This is a tent you get to at maybe 11, 12 at night. You come back into camp, you break your equipment down. As a photographer, you're like, oh my goodness, where am I going to find power? How am I going to charge my camera? How am I going to charge my batteries, my laptop? I need to do a backup. And back then, 10 years ago, laptop batteries would last 2 minutes. And you need to try and find a pure sine wave, a decent solid supply of AC electricity. Forget that. You'd end up with some dodgy generator that's bobbling all over the place, churning out light that's going on and off. You'd have 50 people plugging in. It would overload and cut off 10 times. All the time you're trying to back up like 3,000 to 5,000 pictures every day and charge your equipment. The stress levels are high. This is another shot just by my tripod there. My tent was in the middle on the right. There's a big pile of elephant dung, and I remember in the night waking up and feeling my chest wobble, and there was an elephant that came straight past my tent at night. And again, brilliant. Love these things happening. When you get a call sheet, the call sheet is a big document that tells you what you're doing on a day-to-day basis in any of these shoots. On the call sheet, it may say Tuesday night on the boat, and you think, oh, lovely, on a boat. We'll have a cabin, we'll have a pina colada and sit and watch the view. When it says on the boat, it really does mean on the boat. You will be sleeping on the boat. At best, you'll get given a sleeping mat, and you'll have to pick your area. So here we're on this boat crossing the Lake Victoria, which was just an amazing experience. when we got on the lake, that there were these flies in the air that were so thick you couldn't even see your hand this far in front of you. We had to put our t-shirts over our head just to get on the boats and to stop breathing them in. And then here I slept on top of car number 1 here, the Land Cruiser in the middle. And then it started raining at night and I had to go into one of these support vehicles and slept on top of a load of lead acid marine batteries for the rest of the night. Again, this is another classic case of you'll get to sleep on the boat. We're here in Desperation Sound down in Patagonia. And the presenters are in these lovely Winnebagos, these air-conditioned Winnebagos on the bottom right. And the support vehicles are all on there, and we get to sleep, inside, which is nice because it was -5, -6 at night. And you're always keeping an eye out for what you can shoot and when you're going to be needed next, and do you have time to do a backup, and where can you get your power from? And then you wake up in the morning and you see this beautiful pink light bathing the mountains, and you realize you made a good decision in life to be there. The camera guys and the film guys, we're always competing to be up first, to be at the same place first. I got up here, really early to get to the bow of the boat to get this beautiful sunrise, and found Casper had out-trumped me there and got there before me. We're always looking for similar shots, working side by side. And here you can see the production vehicles there getting onto this sound. We were very lucky to come here. No one had been here for many years beforehand. They don't grant permission. It's a site of special scientific interest. It was a site where beavers used to be pronounced everywhere. They were everywhere down there until all the pelts were harvested, all the beavers were killed, all the trees were cut down, and now they're leaving it now to recover. It's very odd to then see a Mustang in the middle of this environment with a trailer on. Again, these are things you very quickly get used to on Top Gear. It's sort of like your everyday sort of occurrence. This is a good shot. This is the kind of ground that they're trying to cover, and it is real. They are managing to get these vehicles over these rocks and boulders. It can take an hour at a time. Clutches go, we had an occasion on this car in the 928 where the wiring loom got broken by the upright from the suspension strut, went straight through the wiring loom and broke all the wires, and we had to get a wiring loom and an alternator sent to us from Argentina, like 1,000 miles away. It had to be flown in on planes and helicopters and dropped to us. There's always these challenges, so you're always looking at the script, rewriting the script, thinking about new ways of doing it. And again, as a photographer, that car was there. About 20 feet to the right, there was this old post from an old pier, and I'm straight down there looking at ways that I can get a picture of that myself. And this was in the opposite direction, so I'm putting on the 300mm f4 and just waiting for the light to drop a bit and grabbing these shots over my shoulder down the sound. This was one of my favorite shoots. The Argentina Shoot was an amazing shoot. It did go on the whole very well up until it didn't. But from a stills point of view, it was amazing. Here the guys are sat on the beach. There was only about 12 of us here allowed, and I was very lucky to be on this part of the shoot with them. And here they are, eating beaver, drinking rosé, of course, enjoying the view, just having a moment when the cameras are filming them from afar with the radio mics on. And as a photographer, you're leaning in there, trying to get shots and not disturb the piece and the situation. This is where you get to camp again. It was -6 that night. All the water froze in the tent. Your camera batteries are absolutely battered. They're down at about 13–14% after shooting for 8 hours solid. Temperature drops to -6, and you're in your tent and you think you've got time to charge. You start charging. You pop outside to use the ablutions at night, and you see this. And this is just a killer. You're not going to go to bed after seeing that. So I went straight out of there, put the 16–35 f2.8 on, took the 5D3. I shot something like 2,000 shots for 4 hours. I didn't finish until about 4:30 in the morning, knowing that our wheels up roll away time is about 6:30. Gives you 2 hours sleep after a 20-hour day the day before. But it turns out to be worth it. So this was one of the shots that ended up actually going into the main edit of the film and got used in its entirety, which I was very proud about, because the camera guys got annoyed that my shot got in there and kind of stole the show on that. But this was just a collection of about 3,500 images. And you can see the Milky Way spiraling there and the satellite spinning around. The stars were breathtaking. It was an amazing shoot. After that, we were about to go down a black run, a mogul run with these cars. They were literally at the top of the hill when, as you may have heard, things started to get incredibly tense in Argentina because of the number plate on the on the Porsche, which is another story. We basically had to up sticks and abandon Argentina that day. There's a whole nother presentation I would love to give on that one day, but as you can imagine, you know, when the media got involved, it got out of control. There's some amazing backstories behind that. One of mine was that as we were leaving the hotel under duress, being threatened, things getting smashed, my 300 f4 and 1DX went straight to the floor nose first and smashed to 50 pieces, which I didn't care about at the time. I just needed to get out of there. I put it in a bag and on I went. But we initially ordered taxis to get us away from the hotel and get us to an airport to get us out of there. And then we realized the taxi drivers weren't on our side. They were going to do something else, take us somewhere else. So we had to decant from the taxis really quickly. I'd already loaded all my equipment into a taxi. So as I got out of the car with one bag, the taxi drove off with about, I don't know at the time, something around 50,000 images that I had taken over the entire 3 weeks. Everything. So I lost the lot. Every single backup drive, 4 backup drives, 2 backup drives in the main laptop, every memory card, because I was in the hotel editing when things broke out, and we were told to barricade ourselves in the rooms, and then we were told to evacuate. Everything got put into one bag, and that was the bag that the taxi driver decided to steal, along with a lot of other equipment of mine. Through the miracle of an app on my phone, my spare phone, I managed to track him down and take pictures of this taxi driver, this thief, through this app, which was Cerberus was the app many years ago. And it took 3 months for the Argentinian police to investigate, find the guy, turn up at his doorstep, find all of my equipment, and then they shipped it back via some David Attenborough film crew that were coming up from the Antarctic, back to America, back to Italy, back to London, and I ended up picking up my bag with 50,000 images, completely untouched, completely unhacked into, and so that basically saved my career back then. But that's another story. What happened on that day? It was amazing. That's the end of my presentation today. And if anyone's got any questions about anything, about camera related or even behind the scenes related, I'd love to hear them. Or if anyone's got any comments, please let me know. There's a lot of you guys there who've been following Top Gear since you were young. Is there anyone out there who's got any questions I'd like to ask? Well, if one does pop up, I'll answer it. But in the meantime, I hope to give another one of these in the not too distant future, more to do with the more modern equipment that we're using today. I cannot recommend the Canon R5 and the R. I still shoot with the R. The R is a brilliant camera. I know it's got the 5D Mark IV sensor in, which is absolutely perfect for just static shots. I use that for stuff that is not fast moving. So behind the scenes kind of things where you're just shooting where it's pre-lit for you. It's a wonderful camera. And the R5, I'm just, every day I'm dumbfounded by that. I use that for just about everything, birds in flight, cars, any sort of action shots. I don't really know how you can improve upon that. And the 45 megapixels, 48 megapixels, whatever it is, I don't even know these days. I don't care. It is necessary. I really love that cropping ability, being able to crop into that image and use it in so many other ways down the line. It makes a huge difference to what you can do as a photographer, especially doing birds in flight, where it gives you that extra reach as well. I don't use the crop factor. I'd rather crop post and do it, in Lightroom or in Photoshop. But it's completely. I can't tell you how much the mirrorless system has changed. And I wasn't skeptical, but I wasn't a fan of mirrorless to begin with. I thought it would never get to a stage where you could beat a 1DX or 1DX Mark II or 3. But you can. Every single day, I'd rather go for the R5 than one of the older cameras. Thank you. 45 megapixels, London Camera Exchange. Please have a look on the London Camera Exchange. They've got some offers on there now. They're doing £225 off on offers on the R5 and the R6. I hear the R5 and the R6 are also getting a firmware update soon to enable vehicle tracking as well, which should be interesting to see how that goes. So thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate you guys listening. I hope it's been fun and or informative. And if there's anything you'd like to ask me in future, drop me a line on Instagram or on the website, and I'll be happy to hook up with you and answer any questions for you. Thanks for listening. Good night.